We've got a really fascinating show this morning, and we're going to take a deep dive into the last oil bust and see if there are any lessons from that time that we might be able to apply to the next 12 months of giving or so. Before we get to our guests, I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and bring those of you who are new to the show up to speed, because this is a little different than how we've done it in the past. To start, I'm Lindsay Jordan. Nice to meet you. I am easily excitable and super passionate about fundraising because it's literally all I've ever done. And these days I run an organization that fundraises for nonprofits. The show and the expertise of our guests is provided completely free of charge thanks to our partner Tulsa Tech. I wanted to highlight Amy Hamilton. I'm not sure if she's been able to join our call, so we may come back to her. But Amy Hamilton is our buddy at Tulsa Tech. She focuses specifically on nonprofits, professional development, different training opportunities. So can we get a round of applause and emojis for free professional development from Tulsa Tech this morning? Yay, hooray. Speaking of teams, we also have a couple people from my team on today's call, and I wanted to just quickly introduce you to them. First up, we have Jonathan Weber-Mendez. Jonathan, wave, there we go. Jonathan is our senior grants manager in Tulsa. He manages a team of 4 writers here. He's passionate about social justice and veterans causes, and we're happy to have him on the team. He also just celebrated his 1-year anniversary yesterday. Very exciting. We also have Megan Gaddis. Megan is our newest grants manager. She oversees our Oklahoma City team. She is quite brainy. She has a mind for nonprofit finances, and she's super passionate about women's incarceration in the state of Oklahoma. So good morning, Megan. Last but anything but least, we have Laura Orwig. Laura, spotlight yourself. Laura's running the show this morning. In addition to being our communications guru, Laura is also our moderator. So if you have any issues this morning or questions as we move along, drop them into the chat box and Laura will get you taken care of. So typically Retrospect is shot in person. So we have an opportunity to chat and to have coffee and to kind of get to know each other. Obviously, we're in the time of physical distancing, and we wanted to still be able to do the show, which is why we did it via Zoom. That means we're going to miss out on a bit of the social element. So I want to get to know you all as well who have joined us today for the call. If you could take just a couple minutes and drop your name into the chat box, as well as what organization you're with, and maybe to get out of today's session. That would be awesome and help us get to know you a little bit better and what you want to get out of this. A last housekeeping note. So we're going to be with our guests today for about 30 minutes, and then you're going to have an opportunity to ask Mary Ann and Maggie some of your own questions. The mics will stay muted for our Q&A, so we're going to ask you to drop those questions into the chat for Laura. You can drop them in at any time during this morning's call. And Laura's going to go through them and pluck out a couple that we'll present to everybody at the end of today's session. Okay, so today, to get started, we're talking about foundation giving, which is one of my personal favorite topics. But a couple weeks ago, we all got hit with some not great news. I'll say that, not great, some tough news. Over the last 12 months, 73% of charities say that they have seen a drop in individual giving. Put that in perspective, the last historic low for individual giving happened in 2009 during the Great Recession, and that bottomed out at 79%. So to say we're already at 73%, I mean, you can put 2 and 2 together. It's going to be tough for a lot of organizations who rely mainly on individual giving. So right now what we're doing is we're working with a lot of our clients to pivot their foundation strategies. So if they're already working with private family foundations, to strengthen those relationships. And for people who do not yet have a grant strategy, we're working to put one in place as quickly as possible. So why? Why is foundation giving such a big deal, right? Why is it a little bit more insulated than individuals? Well, Giving USA And if you don't know who Giving USA is, I highly suggest checking them out because they're amazing. They put together an annual report for the entire nonprofit sector every year. And according to Giving USA, private foundation giving is the only area of philanthropy that has seen consistent, significant gains every single year since the Great Recession. And in our neck of the woods, since the last oil bust, which brings us to our topic today. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mary Ann Hille and Maggie Yar, President and Executive Director of the Hille Family Charitable Foundation. Mary Ann and her husband Joe Bob launched the foundation in 1997 as a way to extend a helping hand to people who needed it. And Maggie took over as Executive Director in 2002 after having worked at several nonprofits and practicing law in the Dallas area. The past 5 years, according to Foundation Center, the Hille Foundation has given 242 gifts totaling nearly $10 million to 118 different nonprofit organizations. Yeah, that's a lot. More emoticons, more emojis. They were also recently acknowledged in the Tulsa World for their generous gift of land for the Greenwood Rising History Center, which is part of a development plan in conjunction with the 1921 Race Massacre Centennial here in Tulsa. Please join me in welcoming Mary Ann Hille and Maggie Yar. Ladies, welcome to Retrospect.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So we're going to dive on in. I know we've got lots of fun stuff to talk about today. So to start us off, for folks who might not be familiar with the giving guidelines of the foundation, can we just start with an overview of the types of projects you like to fund and maybe which kinds of organizations? Maggie, you want to kick us off?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. These are the easy questions. So in general terms, we are still pretty broad in our mission. We discuss it at least once a year, sometimes more. But so far, our board is still pretty set on keeping our mission broad. But we do typically fund our two, I would say, main areas of funding fall into a handful of categories. We do a lot of public education work, a lot of, we would say, social service, which is kind of a big bucket that would put in a lot of sort of basic needs, human services. Family needs. We do a little bit outside of that. We do some, obviously, in types of funding. We give to everything from capital campaigns to general operating expenses and program expenses. That sort of fluctuates year to year, but based some on sort of community needs, some on what our commitments are. We try to be somewhat balanced in the percentages of those that we give. And other than that, that's pretty much where we focus. We used to do more in sort of some medical research areas. Those have decreased drastically, I would say, in the last, 5-10 years for sure. We still do some national giving around type 1 diabetes in some specific medical research pieces of that. But that's about it. Almost very vast majority of our funds stay here in Tulsa. We do have, it's a small foundation, small board. So we have 2 of our board members who don't live in the Tulsa area. So each of them, all of us get very small amounts of discretionary money that we're allowed to give in our communities. So our board members that are in different communities do provide small grants in the cities where they live. But that's a very small percentage in our overall giving. So we give very big majority here and focus here, mostly in Tulsa. And I don't think that, it's hard to say never, but that is one piece that has not changed at all since our inception.
Very nice. Well, that is a lot. That's very specific. That was great.
Sorry.
So talk to me a little bit about, so you have very, very set, but also kind of broad. You give to a lot of different things, which is wonderful. What kinds of things impact changes to your giving guidelines? And over the last, 30 years of your foundation, what types of things have changed your giving guidelines the most?
Well, go ahead. I'll say a couple of things in that regard. We don't we don't orchestrate what what is asked of us. So we wait and see who has put a program together, who's doing what. So so that's how we start, and that can change as the needs of the community change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we watch. Yeah, you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, in the very beginning, literally when we started, we sat in a living room and discussed who do we want to fund, and we literally made phone calls and said, we're starting this foundation and we'd love to give you some money.
And some people said, no,
this is true. That has changed a lot. So I would say we used to give smaller numbers of grants that were larger. As we've gotten more involved in the community and in nonprofit giving, we've definitely expanded the number of nonprofits that we give to. And so that has changed quite a bit. And certainly, I would say our sort of systems and guidelines and requirements and all of that have really sort of, I would love to say we've set something and it stayed, but in truth, we make tweaks and changes to that yearly. Sometimes month, depending on the meeting, we change things. We meet 3 times a year, and often we make changes even within the year. So we try to be nimble and responsive in looking at what our nonprofits' needs are, and we also try to listen. We get a lot of feedback, and we ask for reports and things, so we learn a lot on trying to ask the right questions to get the information we need while not being too overly burdensome to the nonprofits we're asking them of. And so we change and tweak our systems and requirements often.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very flexible, very cool. I think that kind of pops the bubble of viewing a private foundation as this very strict, stern, these guidelines cannot be broken. It's really interesting to know that you are far more nimble and flexible and reactive to the needs of the market. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
that works best for us.
Yeah, and it's for us, I think, because we're small, there's just 5 of us on the board, and we have a small staff of 3.5. That also lends us to being able to be flexible. We don't have large bureaucracies and systems to have to get through. We can kind of change as we need to. I also think we're all women, and so I think
that makes a difference.
Flexibility and changing and multitasking is sort of natural. So some of that, I think, is just par for the course for us.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk just a little bit about, I know you can't pick favorites, which I understand, but you have funded some really spectacular projects in the time the foundation's been around. So can you share with us what some of your favorite types of things might be to fund? Or anything that was particularly meaningful to you?
Yeah, and you're right. It's hard to pick any favorites, and even if we have them, we're not telling. I would say the things when I think about favorites, I think the ones that stand out are really the nonprofits that are innovative. I can think about specific projects or really. Like I've said, we're pretty small. And so a lot of the stuff that's the most impactful are sometimes the new ones. And we can think about organizations that, we can literally remember them coming to us and saying, hey, I have this idea, what do you think? And being able to sort of start from the beginning. And my dad, who started the foundation, was an entrepreneur, and he was very, he was not risk adverse. And so I think we have a little bit of that spirit too. And so some of those have been fun, obviously calculated risks, and we have a lot of responsibility around, our fiscal responsibility. We're certainly not willy-nilly, but those have been fun to see. Some of those, I think I would say, and I say this to nonprofits we work with, sometimes those are sort of easy sells in a board meeting. Our board gets excited about something that's new and different, and certainly something that's addressing a specific need we're seeing, which is certainly going to be playing into the times we've already seen it now, and I imagine we'll really be seeing it in the months and really years to come as we all adjust and adapt to this new world order that we're all facing. So I think those are some of the things that stand out, the innovativeness. And of course in Tulsa, you know, if you can look back over the last 10 years, we've had some real gains in, you know, female incarceration and early education in children, and being able to be a part of some of that from the beginning has been, it's nice to see.
And education, after school programs and things like that are very innovative. So yeah.
Very nice.
That's good.
Yep.
Good job. You did not give away anything. No name.
Good job.
So let's switch gears just a little bit. I'm going to paint a picture. 2007, the market is moving along swimmingly. A barrel of oil sells for about $80, and within a year it's going to jump up to 110. There are early warning signs of a recession. Most Oklahomans are not seeing it, they're not thinking about it. And then, bam, housing crisis, market tumbles. When did you know? I'm going to pitch this one over to Mary Ann. When did you know that giving in Oklahoma was going to look different?
Well, my husband was in the oil business from his first job. So, and when he was a teenager, and that's just the nature of the oil business. If you think the price is always going to be whatever number you want to pick, that is so wrong. And you can see just from lately, from it going way up to -30. I've never seen it go below 0, but that's the oil business. It goes up and it goes down, but then it comes back up again. So you have to not be in debt. That's the killer. If things go south and you're in debt, then that's what the big problem is. But that's no different than the Great Recession in the 20s. People who were in debt didn't make it out. So my father was my mother and father got married in 1929. That was a great year to start off. And he never even had a credit card until he was in his 70s.
Wow.
It just felt like you had to pay cash for everything. You just could never have a debt for anything. So and a lot of people of that era felt that way. I don't think people feel that way anymore. But yeah, not many people go without a credit card. But anyway, that has being careful financially. Certainly we see that with nonprofits. When they're careful with the finances, then they can survive an up and down bust.
And it didn't freak you out when you saw it. You knew what that looked like and you were okay with it.
Oh yeah.
How did you think it was going to impact?
How long it's going to last, how far it's going to dive. Yeah, that's it.
And I can say too, from sort of financial perspective from the foundation, we've always managed our portfolio at a pretty moderate risk sort of whole idea. Luckily for us, it was really just sort of fortuitous. We actually had a big sale of a bunch of stocks right before the market really fell. And I would love to say that we planned for it. We knew it was coming, but in truth, we had just sort of slowly been deploying some of the cash back into the market, but we hadn't had a big surge back in. And so we luckily actually had a pretty big cash reserve that allowed us to not take quite the hit that some foundations certainly saw. So we did, of course, decrease in net worth, but not to such a degree that it impacted drastically our giving. It did us to a small degree. Our board also made a pretty clear decision to try to keep our giving levels at close to what they were in the previous couple of years, just to try and at least sort of scale back slowly so we weren't pulling the rug out from anyone. It does make you, though, sometimes I think we have a tendency to maybe hang on to nonprofits a little too long when we know better, but we're trying to just sort of ease them out. It did make a few of those conversations. Not that those are ever easy conversations, but it certainly pushed us to say, okay, we're going to have to let a few go that we probably should have anyway. But otherwise, we tried pretty much to stay as close to that as we could.
Did you feel that you had to step into any of the gaps that were created when individual giving and corporate giving went down? Did you feel like, as a foundation that was in a pretty good position, that did you feel a sense of responsibility to step into those gaps?
Yes, sure, of course. Yeah, especially in regard to food insecurity. That was one thing that we noticed immediately with schools closing and kids now are
today.
Yes, today. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No.
But no, you're right. Yeah. Yes, we feel a huge amount of responsibility, whether in 2008 or today. Yes. That is our whole purpose. We're also very clear how large of a gap we can fill. So we understand with giving the amount that we give a year, we're certainly not closing a gap that our federal or state or city governments need to be paying for. So we certainly understand where our position is in that. So we try to be very thoughtful in sort of the plugs that we can make.
Right. That's awesome. So that is also a lot to carry from an emotional labor standpoint. I think it's incredible that you feel the calling to help fill those gaps. But I imagine that, especially in times like now, but particularly back during the last Great Recession, that creates a certain level of stress and anxiety. I mean, that's a tall order to fill, to maintain your commitment to the nonprofits that you have already pledged to, and then to go above and beyond that, try and help organizations that might be struggling through this. How, from a self-care, a wellness perspective, did you manage your own stress and anxiety through that time?
Well, for one thing, we know who we are. We knew then and now too, we're not going to be able, as we say, we're not going to be able to fix it. So you have to have the attitude that you do what you can, and then you pray about it, you worry about it, but that's all you can do.
Yeah.
I think we take, I think from a general perspective, I would say probably my mom and I certainly carry this perspective, and I would think that the rest of our board does too. And that is, as a foundation, we are just a little bit removed sometimes from the need. So I think we worry much more about sort of the front lines of the nonprofits and what they're seeing daily and what they're worrying about. I think it allows us to put our own stress and worry in perspective. When we think we're sort of one step removed, and how do you manage your own stress? I think in a lot of ways we manage it by putting our own lives in perspective with what others that we see all the time are dealing with. And then I think also Mom is exactly right. We're pretty clear on who we are and how much we can do. Our motto has always sort of been the fable about the one starfish. So we're pretty comfortable in trying to make sure, okay, we know we're certainly not saving all of Tulsa. So what small part are we doing, and how can we make that difference? And so I think keeping that in perspective helps with mental health, as well as everything else. Hopefully everyone is doing, we take time off, we spend time with our families.
Yeah.
Guys, we drink wine.
There it is. That's the answer I was looking for. Really, that's it.
Like everyone else, yeah.
And you have to laugh.
Lots of laughter. Yes.
Right. Okay, so I want to back up just a little bit, because I'm not actually familiar with the fable of the starfish. Can you share that with us?
Go ahead, Mom.
Okay, well, it's an old story about a boy who was walking on the beach one morning, and there were just a flood of starfish that had washed up on the beach. And with every wave, more came up on the beach. And as he came up to him, the young boy would pick him up and throw him back in the ocean. But of course, he was being overwhelmed by the waves that were coming in faster than he could throw them back. And so a man came up to him and said, "Why are you doing that? You can't possibly get them all. You can't possibly make a difference for all of these starfish." And he picked up one and threw it back in, and he said, "Well, it made a difference to that one." So that's the way we feel about it. We're a small foundation, but sometimes we can make a difference to somebody.
I love that. That's awesome. That's wonderful. So, all right, let's take that one starfish then. Let's go with this analogy. During the last oil bust, were there any particular organizations or strategies that you saw were very innovative in that time that maybe helped those nonprofits get through that period a little bit better?
Sure. I mean, I think I think the best way to answer that is really just sort of speak of it in general terms, especially given what we're seeing today. And I think similarly, this is what nonprofits are probably thinking and worrying about now. And I think that is really, I think it comes down to collaboration. I think, you know, I know nonprofits probably get tired of hearing funders talk about working together. I think sometimes there's always this worry that what we're really saying is that we want you guys to merge and someone should close and someone else should take them over. And sometimes that's true, but oftentimes really what it means is just combining resources, right? So as we're facing limited resources, we're expecting you and we're trying to be nimble and flexible and adjusting our finances the best, stretching them as far as we can. We're expecting the same of you. And so being able to really look at the nonprofits who were willing to say, this is what we're not doing well, this is what we need help with, this is an organization that's doing that better. We love to see the partnering. I think in times of crisis, the organizations who were willing to really bind together and say, okay, how can, you know, I think the arts in Tulsa specifically has been a good example of, it's definitely seen ups and downs and sort of ebbs and flows. And that's an area I think that often struggles in times of bust, as foundations are really, and people are focusing on, they would say more sort of, you know, essentials or basic needs. And so seeing organizations that can really come together so that they're still able to deliver their service, but they're doing it on a tighter budget, I think is the really way nonprofits survive. And that's certainly what we're looking for. For us, we're trying to figure out how to stretch our dollars. How do we make the most impact using the least amount that we can in each grant that we give, which just allows us to give more. And so that's really what we're looking for, is the innovation. And also I think the willingness to say what you need. I think often nonprofits are afraid to say where they're struggling, especially to foundations. And in truth, that's exactly what we're looking for. We don't see struggle as failure. We see that as where we could step in. And so, yeah. And I think the organizations during that time who were really willing to come to us and say, okay, this is where we're really hurting. This is where we see if we lose this is the essential piece of what we're doing. We have to hang on to that. It allowed us to really direct funds to those things so that they could really focus in on what they saw as their most important piece of their mission, or their most, I don't know, effective way to deliver their service. And often as foundations, you know, we're just enough outside that we don't see that. Those are the kind of things you don't necessarily see in reading a grant proposal or even pouring through your 990s or your financials. We can get a good picture, sometimes even I think a great picture of who you are and what you're doing. But often we really need that actual feedback from you to say, this is really what that looks like. Make sense?
Yeah.
That is really interesting.
Also, when you mentioned that giving was down such an amazing amount, lately we've seen nonprofits that have canceled all of their all of their spring and summer, and sometimes even in the fall, their fundraisers.
Right.
But on the other hand, some nonprofits have also moved up to doing innovative things such as something that you can do online. And so they have managed to put things online and promote that and raise some money that way. Because if you can't have a big gathering where people come, and that's where you get lots of $20 tickets or $20 giving for $100 tickets, and you know that all of that money comes in from people who are just individual givers. If you don't have that anymore, that's a big hit. But if you can figure out something to do that'll still get people to give to you, but they don't get to come to a party, then that's very innovative thinking, and it has worked well. We've seen that for some that have had to give up their fundraisers for the year.
But here's what I'm hearing. I heard 3 things. I want to make sure that I got these down.
Okay.
So 3 things you think that really have made a difference in the past would be partner up,
Yeah.
communicate clearly the need, and take risk.
Yeah.
That's great advice. I hope everybody's taking notes. That was good. So, okay, let's move on just a little bit out of the past and into the future, because I know a lot of folks right now are, one of the primary reasons for jumping on this call is obviously we want to learn from the past so that we can see if there's anything that we can apply to our future. It's going to be an interesting 12 months, that's for sure. So we talked through kind of what the strategies might be, maybe some of those innovative practices that folks can take forward. One of the things I found that was really interesting recently is that some foundation leaders and wealthy donors have suggested publicly that they think that because of the COVID-19 emergency and the economic fallout, that Congress should change the law so that private foundations are giving 10% payout instead of 5% of their assets. I just wanted to get your feedback on something like that. It seems like you guys really respond to the market needs. And you really move with the market as far as what the most pressing needs are. Is that tapping into your existing assets beyond that 5%? Is that something you all would ever consider?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, of course, consider, sure. I think for us, you know, it's a balance, right? So right now, and we address this pretty much yearly, and mom and dad obviously were founders. Mom is still here, so we listen to her and her guidance, and so far her wish is that our foundation stays in perpetuity. So she's not interested in having it go away anytime soon. And so with that being one piece we have to balance, and then obviously our charitable donation percentage is the other piece. So I mean, in truth, 10% is a high bar. If we're not making 10% in the market, but we're giving away 10%, then I mean, I'm not a math wizard, but that's decreasing your assets over time, and so it's a balance. So if you want giving in perpetuity, then you need to adjust how much you give a year so that you can continue to grow. We look very closely at our expenses as well as our charitable deductions every year, so we try to balance that. We have certainly gone through years where we have gone well over our 5% and then faced a pretty large buildup of carryover that we've had to really discuss on how do we address. So it's a balance. I can see both sides of the argument and I would say we would adjust either way. If it becomes a 5% payout, then we would do that. We would probably have to really think about how we're investing and how we're growing to try and adjust to the 10%. I think we definitely have some different conversations with our financial advisors if our payout is 10% versus 5%. But of course, we would adjust.
We'll do it. Yeah.
It's very, I appreciate you sharing that with us, because that is I could imagine that would be a very difficult terrain to navigate. So I appreciate you kind of sharing what your strategy might look might look like with us on that.
Yeah.
My only other question today about the future, and then I think we're going to turn it over to folks who have been dropping questions in the chat box, hopefully to Laura, is so the next 12 months, forecasting out to middle of 2021, the organizations that you award funds to, what do they have in common?
Well, all of the organizations that we fund generally are giving a hand up to somebody. We want to be able to better the situation of our neighbors. So whether that be through arts or or environment, mostly that's through schools or helping out family structure. That's education, is higher education, as well as K through 12 or preschool through 12. Those are the tickets to the future. You have to have a strong base in order to be able to go somewhere in the world. So that, and all the things that entails: mental health, a nice place to live, adequate food, being able to learn in a safe environment. Those things are all important and that's been the bedrock of our giving always. I don't see that that's going to be very different.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, I think certainly in these uncertain times, there's definitely, I would say a highlight on what we already look at, which is obviously the nonprofits are responsible and they are transparent, fiscally efficient. Those are the things we look at in each of the grants that we assess, both in the specific grant and in the organization that we're looking at. I think in times of crisis like this, that gets heightened just because dollars are tighter, right? So we're paying more attention, even more attention to those, maybe even more so. I think for us, the other thing just very recently that we're certainly talking a lot about and thinking a lot about in these times that I would foresee over the next 12 months will probably be weaving into some of the work we're doing. And that's really around, I would say, voter engagement and those processes, how to private foundations, who we typically stay away from any sort of lobbying efforts or specific political campaigns. But in this time, I see for our foundation a lot more discussion around how do we really help specifically in Tulsa around engagement and empowerment in that way. So that has been something we've been talking about kind of a little bit over the last few months, and then certainly over the last week or so, lots of conversations around that and thinking through. So, and then of course, in the last couple of months, we switched quickly with the onset of COVID into really figuring out how to adjust our systems to address nonprofit needs. So we started by just sort of suspending all requirements and trying to kind of just get out emergency funding to nonprofits quickly to try to take off the stress of any sort of reports they had due to us or application deadlines or requirements. Obviously, we can't do that forever. So we're already sort of working through how do we kind of slowly implement back in some of our systems while still allowing that relief of some pressure. I think certainly we know we're going to be looking at requests around nonprofits' increased needs in addressing COVID and how do they, like I was saying before, how do you have no fundraisers and still make the often very hard to get general operating dollars nonprofits get from those sort of events? How do we help adjust? How do we help with that, as well as just looking at their increased needs and complying with social distance laws and or regulations and rules around all of that. So those are all things that we're, as you guys all are, sort of churning through constantly, figuring out what that's going to look like. I would imagine if we reconvened in 12 months, our answers to that might be different. A lot of this is stuff we're thinking about. And then for us too, we're pretty heavily involved in the upcoming centennial. So this next year, we just celebrated our 99th year on Sunday. we're certainly, that is sort of kicking into overdrive. So we'll be seeing a lot of that, investing a lot of that, and time and energy anyway, for sure.
To clarify that, into the social justice space specifically, or Centennial specifically?
Well, we're previous to this, we've been involved in the Centennial just over the last few years, just knowing that it was upcoming. The social justice piece, I think they certainly tie in together, given the events over the last week or so. Certainly, that's, I think, becoming more and more to our forefront and heavy in our minds and hearts. So we'll be we've been talking about and looking more at where we want to step into that space and what that looks like.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. Well, I've done a whole bunch of talking today, and I know we've got some really good questions. So I'm going to hand this over to Laura. Laura, why don't you give us a couple? I've been watching the questions as they've been coming in. Give us a couple of questions from our participants today.
Okay. Let's see. From Katie, we had, do you have any tips for a newer organization trying to build relationships and sustainability in the middle of a recession or a pandemic?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, obviously we can't speak to all foundations in Tulsa, but I think as a general rule, and I've seen a few people on here that can probably jump in and attest to this too. The nonprofit giving community in Tulsa, the funding community, is very small. We all know each other. So I think for the most part, everyone is pretty approachable. So I would say we're both approachable, which is great. We're also all very different, which I know makes it difficult for nonprofits. None of us have the same requirements. None of us have the same deadlines. We all have different personalities, all those things. But I think the biggest thing to do is really to reach out, to ask some questions. I would say before you spin your wheels writing a bunch of requests without really kind of talking to who you're sending them to first, you probably save yourself a lot of time and effort. Whether that's, some foundations want emails, phone calls, whatever that looks like. I think increasing communication prior to asking for funds is probably going to be even more important than before.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Great, thank you. And then Brandy asks, do you have any inspiring, hopeful thoughts about the immediate future for our beloved nonprofit sector?
Good job, Randy.
Okay, Randy.
Yeah. Inspiring and hopeful.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well,
that's a big task today.
Gee,
Go
well, Randy, yeah, maybe you could help out on that one.
But hard to feel real inspired today.
I don't exactly feel inspired, but I do feel hopeful because we're tough people. Oklahomans are tough, and Americans are tough. And I think we can look at our neighbors and have sympathy and empathy for them. I think we're, as people in the West, we are more alike perhaps than some other groups that are more entrenched. We're a younger group. Well, some of us are young, but that's what I mean. I think Oklahomans are tough. I'm an optimistic person, and I think we're not going to be put down by this COVID thing and by protests and by ugliness. We're going to be able to rise above that and to do the things that are right and to take care of the people that need to be taken care of and to look at everyone with an equal eye. Ta-da!
Ta-da! That's a really hard question. Be uplifting and inspiring these days. I think I've been in most of the group discussions I've been in right now. I think everybody feels the emotional labor of everything that we're living through right now. So thank you for taking on that question, Mary Ann. That's a big one.
Thanks for asking that, Randy.
Yeah. Oof.
I'll get even.
All right, from Kathy, we have, how can a nonprofit get the attention of a foundation in the Tulsa area?
I mean, I think a couple of things that what I said before is just communicating, obviously. I think the other thing is really, the good and bad thing for nonprofits in the Tulsa community is that you have a lot of really great competition. You have some competition or partners, depending on how you want to look at it. For being positive, we'll definitely say partners. So I think you should first, for sure, look to each other, see what other people are doing, and getting the attention. As Mom alluded to before, I think as Oklahomans, I think we have a sort of a natural sense of helpfulness and innovation. So if you're doing something different and exciting, addressing a need that is particularly pertinent that we're all looking at, then you get the attention by doing something worthwhile. And then letting us know about it. Sometimes that helps too. We all stay as informed as we can be, but it certainly doesn't hurt to, let us know what you're doing and what your accomplishments are. We'd love to know.
Good.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have one last one. This was actually from me. How involved are you with organizations after a grant awarded? Do you wish organizations would reach out and connect more?
Yes. So basically how we handle it, sometimes it's a case-by-case basis, but as a general rule, we really look at our reporting requirements based on the amount of the gift that we gave. So what we try to do is, if we're giving you a very small grant, then we don't want, maybe I should say it this way, we try to couch how much we're giving and how much you have to do back. So we don't want to overburden you with, we gave you a very small grant, please spend hours and hours filling out a report for us that you got a small amount of money for. So we try to think about it in those terms. I don't think, there's very few grants we give that we ask for no feedback from. We try to, at least if it's a small grant, give you the opportunity to say, please let us know, basically how it went. For bigger grants, we write grant agreements and have specific reporting requirements around those, that we ask nonprofits to provide a higher level, more in-depth level of feedback. I think that, as I was saying before about nonprofits reaching out, it's not just in before granting, but also during. We have not many horror stories, but a couple of organizations that applied for a grant, had a good idea, thought it was a good idea. We funded it, and at some point during the process, it wasn't working. And rather than coming to us in the beginning or the middle and saying, hey, this isn't working, they just kind of did badly and spent out the whole grant, and then came back and said, oh, by the way, that didn't work, but we went ahead and kept doing it badly until your money was gone. It would have been great had we been in communication with them during. I think nonprofits often worry about showing failure, when in truth, we rarely see failures. Most of them are just attempts. You learn, and hey, we had this great idea, we thought it was going to work, it's not working that way, we really want to be able to adjust. We would much rather you tell us that. Our entire purpose is to make a difference and to do it efficiently, and to try to stretch our dollars to the furthest we can. So letting us know sooner than later, I think, is the best advice we could give. We'd much rather hear that than hear you spent it all and it didn't work. Let us know along the way. We'd love to know that. And our board, as I said, we're small. We read everything you send us. We try to keep up the best we can and who you are and what you're doing and the achievements you're making. We share those with our larger board as best we can too, in each meeting that we have a year. So we all try to stay as informed as we can on what you're doing. But we only know as much as you tell us or as we read in the paper. So the more we know, the better. Anything else?
Awesome. Can we get a big round of applause and emojis and chat messages and like raise your coffee or your water, whatever it is you're drinking? Thank you, ladies, so much for this morning. This has been wonderful. Really, really great information. And thank you to all of you who joined us today.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Oh.
Yeah, we hope to be back filming in person for our August show. And we're going to have a mom panel, the mom panel, missioning while momming, I think is what we're going to call this. But we're going to take a deep dive into what it means to be a mom and work for a nonprofit and all of the challenges that come along with that and all of the benefits as well. So Laura's going to send everybody an email after today. Look for that registration link, and we'll also have some additional information for you about the Hille Foundation and what they've been up to. Again, I'm Lindsay Jordan. I'm the CEO and founder of On Fundraising, where we provide fresh fundraising solutions for high impact nonprofits. And if there's anything that we've talked about here today we can help you with, please don't be a stranger. And we look forward to seeing you in August.
Thanks,
Maggie, Mary Ann, thank you again.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.